Hi, I'm Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status Coup News. And today we're speaking with Kamau Franklin again, who's an organizer in Atlanta working on the Stop Cop City movement. Welcome, Kamau. I'm happy to have you back on the show. Interested in getting some updates in the wake of last week, where you guys had basically a week of organizing rallies. Ended up in a festival where multiple people were arrested and charged again as domestic terrorists. So just wanted to get some updates from you on what's going on there and next steps and whatnot. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Always enjoy talking to you. And so the week of action is still going on as we speak. Tonight is a big night where we're having a rally and demonstration at 6 p.m. at the King Center, which is downtown Atlanta. Yeah. This is connected to a national day of action around police violence and police terror in our communities. And so we have about 22 to 25 cities that have registered at the very least to do everything from direct action to civil disobedience to banner drops to marches, rallies, teach-ins. Excuse me. So we're pretty excited about that. We're pretty excited about the type of traction that this is getting. And so, yes, we've had different type of actions this whole week, and there will be more to continue. There's going to be a teach-in on Saturday that's connecting Cop City to the Palestinian issue because of the connections with the Israeli police to the Georgia police.
Right.
And if we go back to the festival that you brought up at the beginning of the conversation, that was actually on day 2 of our organizing and actions. And so that festival, there was an action that was a mile away from the festival. The police decided to use that as an excuse and or rationale to break up the actual music festival. And so they went there and arrested approximately 35 people, 23 additional charges of domestic terrorism, which brings the total number to now 42 people who've been charged with domestic terrorism. Since the beginning of our protests, we've had over 70 to 75 arrests by the police for different charges. And again, this last layer of charges now brings the majority of them now to be domestic terrorism charges. So we again think this is another attempt to criminalize the movement, to scare people off from joining. It is not working. People are still out there organizing. They're actually now following protesters around in downtown Atlanta, threatening them as they hand out flyers, making folks disperse because they're nervous about it. But they think that's going to slow us down or stop this movement, and we will not stop this movement.
No, if anything, they're going to create more anger, not only in their constituency there in Atlanta, but also across the country. It's obvious that most folks there don't want Cop City to be built, and the politicians are continuing to ignore that message. Obviously, the police are taking their cue from that. I want to go back to the night of the music festival. You mentioned that there were 2 separate locations. My understanding is there was a musical festival going on in Weelaunee Park. Bands were playing. There were families there. Children were present. And the area in which some equipment was set on fire was a completely different area. Yet the cops came into the music festival and were arresting people there without cause. Is that correct?
That is correct. The other area where they have already cordoned off in terms of their plans to build Cop City was a mile away from the actual music festival. And so they decided to travel from that area to the music festival. And as you said, they basically stopped the festival from happening. They threatened people. They actually threatened to shoot people. People were pepper sprayed, thrown to the ground. Again, indiscriminate arrests. Folks who were not involved in the civil disobedience were arrested. In fact, they arrested a National Lawyers Guild attorney who was standing and watching things. And so this continues again. And this is the same pattern we've seen in prior arrests. People who just happen to be, or people who are engaged in civil disobedience, but have not engaged in any other action but civil disobedience. And when we say civil disobedience, by that we mean people who have done nothing else but sit in trees, and people who have camped out in the forest have been arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. As I've said before, it would be one thing if charges were sort of commensurate with the actions that people took. We would still fight those charges. We would still be opposed to those charges, but at least that would be understandable. What's happening here is something on a whole new level in terms of terrorizing and trying to make a movement scared and trying to squash dissent or quash dissent. That's really what their goal is with the way in which these charges are being thrown out there.
I agree. They are basically arresting people that have done nothing more than exercise First Amendment rights. They are trying to kill political dissent. That is the goal of this. I think they're well aware that none of these individuals have engaged in any acts of domestic terrorism. I also want to mention for folks that are unaware, this is a state law. This is a Georgia state law. This is not federal offenses. These are state law, GBI. So the state domestic terrorism law, this is the first time it's been used since it was created back in 2017 in the wake of Dylann Roof. And, it's obvious that it's being politicized in a way that's completely offensive. If you're against, if you want to stop the government from squashing First Amendment rights, then this should make you angry. And that means everybody, not just people on the left. I want to read, Kamau, I want to read Southern Poverty Law Center. You mentioned a legal observer was one of those arrested. Not only were they with the NLG or the National Lawyers Guild, they are an employee of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they put out a statement. Law enforcement detained at least 35 demonstrators in Atlanta on Sunday, including an SPLC employee who was arrested while acting and identifying as a legal observer on behalf of NLG. This is part of a months-long escalation of policing tactics against protesters and observers who oppose the destruction of the Weelaunee Forest to build a police training facility. The SPLC will continue to urge de-escalation of violence and police use of force against Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, working in partnership to dismantle white supremacy, strengthen intersectional movements, and advance the human rights of all people. Stop Cop City. So, they've now escalated to this point where they've arrested a Southern Poverty Law Center employee. That's pretty intense. So I would imagine that the SPLC getting involved will be beneficial to the movement because that's some serious legal backing. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, no, we want them to be involved. We have a broad array of legal organizations, legal defense organizations, as well as, of course, individual criminal defense attorneys who have stepped forward and decided to help support the movement and the activists and organizers who they also feel are being overcharged in an attempt to kill dissent, in an attempt to stop dissent. And so we welcome folks coming in. We've gotten outreach from several different law firms who specialize in either trying to do movement work or anti-police brutality work or anti-repression work. And those forces have been useful and helpful and have helped push the way forward in terms of coming up with legal strategies and support. So we do understand as organizers and activists, we are not alone in this. That there is, again, a larger movement that as much as the city and the state try to criminalize and separate organizers and activists, we have seen and they have seen that this is a large movement, a diverse movement, a movement of many different ideological and philosophical views, and one that won't stop until we stop Cop City.
Indeed. In fact, I had spoken with the family of one of those that are facing domestic terrorism charges. He is a native of Atlanta, lives there in Atlanta. The police have been trying to put out this discourse that it's all outside agitators that are causing the problems. And in his particular case, what kind of blew me away is I watched the bail hearing, and the DA was trying to make the case that because he was the one that was from Atlanta that they arrested, that he was the ringleader. And this is not based on any evidence whatsoever. This particular individual this is the protest that I had filmed. So he had been at the front of this protest carrying a banner the entire night. He had absolutely not participated in any of the window breaking. But yet this kid has an ankle bracelet on and he's facing domestic terrorism charges. It's completely insane. What do you make of that?
Even amongst the last 23 who just recently were arrested and charged with domestic terrorism, they all were denied bail. And so you are correct. There's not even an attempt to follow the law, to see whether or not people have community ties, to look at their individual cases and what they're being, what is the evidence, the early evidence to even suggest
there's
they were
none.
involved in any. No, there's nothing whatsoever. This is just basically the district attorneys, the prosecutors are saying something, and the judge is going along with it. What I should say is that the police are telling the prosecutors, and the prosecutors are saying it to the judge, and the judges are going along with it. This has nothing to do with a fair trial, a fair hearing, or making sure that people are reasonably assessed in terms of even flight risk for bail. This really has to do with repressing organizers and making people scared. Yeah,
I agree. It's about chilling the First Amendment. It's crazy to me. I doubt that any of these cases will make it through a probable cause hearing, quite frankly. But in the meantime, they got what they wanted. In their mind, they think if we squash the political dissent, we tamp down and arrest these guys, there will be less protesters out there because they'll be afraid of getting also charged as domestic terrorists. But I don't see that happening. I think it's having the opposite effect, quite frankly. People are angry that they are having their constitutional rights infringed upon. Also, I want to mention, in the meantime, because of the way the district attorney has gone about this, the way the Atlanta police have gone about this, there are a lot of right-wing extremist groups on Telegram that are sharing these individuals' photos and names and addresses and encouraging their followers to go harass them, which I think is incredibly dangerous. Now you have folks that actually truly are, in some respects, domestic terrorists, neo-Nazi groups, whatnot, targeting these guys because they get very angry about anything that they perceive as being Antifa. I have concern about that. Do you have concern? Has there been any discussion with other activists on this?
No, we definitely are taking notice of the amount of fascist ire we are drawing as a movement. And I completely agree with you. What happens in these time periods is with policing authorities or policing agencies, they don't focus in on right-wing terror. They don't focus in on the actions of fascists. They focus in on left and progressive forces. And so even when we look at the history of the civil rights movement, when the FBI went to the South, they didn't focus in on breaking up the Klan. It was organizations, civil rights organizations, nonviolent institutions, people like the Freedom Riders, SNCC, Dr. King, SCL, NAACP. Those were the organizations and different community organizers who were infiltrated and killed and their organizations destroyed. And they only did a little bit to the Klan, if anything, because a lot of the local law enforcement were actually involved in the Klan and part of it. And we see those
they were. At that time, it was really common. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and we see those same aspects today. And it's not only just the Klan, but you have things like the Oath Keepers or the you have other right-wing organizations like the Proud Boys, and you see all of these law enforcement links to these organizations and groups, but yet they're not the ones being investigated by the state, city, and federal authorities. It is organizers who are protesting against police violence who get all the attention.
Indeed. I do want to turn our attention to politicians now, because I think part of the problem as to how we got to this place is that the politicians weren't listening to their constituents. You've had a very unpopular policy position that has been supported now through 2 city councils. You have a mayor that was part of the original city council that put forth the plans for Cop City. He's now the mayor, and obviously he's not backing down on trying to push this through. I did want to say I saw Representative, I believe her name is pronounced Rua Roman. She's from the Duluth area. She put out a tweet that basically said, "I'm incredibly concerned about the reports coming out of Wehelani Park. I saw pictures of kids from earlier, yet there's no indication those kids made it out safely." She's referring to the police using tear gas and whatnot measures inside the music festival that night. There were kids present. Additionally, it appears legal observers were detained. For those in and around the area, please share any updates. So I'm starting to see somewhat of some folks stepping out and saying this is not right, this has gone too far. How do you see it internally there in Atlanta? Are you seeing any movement on the political side that we should know about?
I mean, I think you brought up one of the strongest cases. There may be a couple of other state representatives who have said some things, but in reality, we've had a sort of a pitiful response from the political class, particularly those who bill themselves as progressives or left-leaning. These folks have not stepped out, even if they're going to be in a minority. There are a block of people, particularly who ran for the city council, who have not stepped out in front of this issue and said, we are opposed to Cop City. And that's what we need in terms of either political cover or, again, to show the breadth. It does us no good as organizers for folks to say they have our back behind the scenes. Yeah. But in public, they say nothing, and or they seem to be siding up to the mayor and to the police. So we need elected officials who are going to step out in front, who are going to say something. It's not that we expect a whole lot, but at the very least, if you're calling yourself progressive, you have to understand that the domestic terrorism charges are ridiculous on their face. You have to understand that calling for an investigation that's an independent investigation into the killing of Tortuguita has to happen. And at the very least, you have to put forth that this project should be slowed down, if not stopped. because it didn't go through a fair process, a just process. The community was not involved in any decision making. And so therefore we expect at the very least for so-called progressive leadership who are elected officials to do something of that nature.
Indeed. It's interesting to me, Kamau, because it seems like some of the more moderate folks in Atlanta, they might be okay and agree to something that was a much smaller scale. So if they scaled this thing back, 50 to 75% and had some other ideas, they could probably get more political buy-in. But the fact that they keep doubling down on this monstrosity of a political training center that is might as well be a military base it's mind-numbing to me that, and these are Democrats. It's not just Republicans. It's not just Brian Kemp, right? Some folks want to make it about the Republicans, but I'd say most of these city council folks are Democrats. So
no, all of them are Democrats.
All
so
of
let's
them.
be clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, there's one independent, and that's Mary Norwood, who is part of Buckhead.
Okay.
But just to be very, very clear on this has been led by and pushed through by so-called liberal, progressive Democrats. Folks who say they stand up for certain communities, that they respect people's rights, that they're fighting to bring more resources. Those are the folks who decided that when the city had $30 million, it should go to build Cop City. They've now decided to work hand in hand with the right-wing Republican white supremacist governor of Georgia in order to fight back against protesters and organizers. And again, as we said earlier, chill dissent.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It's just mind-numbing to me, quite frankly. The only thing that would make sense in this arena is that there is some sort of quid pro quo that's happened between the corporations funding the police foundation and these politicians, because they are absolutely ignoring their constituency. When I was there the last time, I couldn't find anybody that was like, yeah, we want this thing built. I mean, I even talked to grandmas that were like, no, that's a bad idea. So it's an egregious example of politics gone wrong. All right, so what are your next movements? So we're still in your week of activism. You said you have this evening. There's a protest. I know we are going to be covering a Cop City protest in New York later this afternoon. We've got some coming up in LA. So there is solidarity across the country. What other next steps are going to be happening there in Atlanta that folks should know about?
I think immediately after the week of action, we're going to start stepping up our own campaign to stop the DNC from coming to Atlanta. Okay. Atlanta is one of 3 cities in which the DNC said it is looking for. We want to make sure that the DNC understands that if they come to Atlanta, they're going to be facing protest morning, noon, and night. Also, Atlanta is attempting to get FIFA the World Cup here, and we also need FIFA to understand that if they come here, a place that is obviously abusing people's human rights, ability to protest and First Amendment rights, that they too will be protested. So we think that there has to be a political/economic price paid by these elected officials if they want to go forth and put together a violent police militarized center. Instead of listening to people, as you said, who have been opposed to it, then we are going to do what we can to fight back and make sure that these other institutions that they want to bring here don't come here, or know that there's consequences if they do.
Have there been any voices calling for the recall of any of these city council members?
Well, we had a petition out against the mayor in particular, telling the mayor to resign, where we had over 100 organizations that signed on to that petition. And so we have been focusing more on base building and organizing in the community and putting the word out. We have a little hope. We do want elected officials to come out and say something, but it's hard to expect the same elected officials who have time and time and again laid down on this to all of a sudden get a backbone and stand up and say, hey, we're opposed to Cop City. Again, even if they say it in private, they have not made it known publicly, and especially not often enough so that folks understand that there should not be, that there's not a solid block of folks who are supporting this in terms of the elected officials, but there's clearly a class of them who are fighting against it and who are pushing back.
So why is that? Why is there this disconnect where they might not be on board with what's happening, but they're remaining silent? What are they afraid of?
Oh, I think they're currying favor with the mayor, to be quite frank. I think they're currying favor with the mayor. That makes sense. I think they want to stay in good standing with the police chief. I think they don't want to seem too politicized or out there on this kind of issue. And so I think they very clearly are attempting to either situate themselves for future runs for other offices, or they like getting the attention of the mayor, getting invited to certain events and activities, and they don't want to mess that up, including their relationships with some of the corporations that are also putting money towards this.
Painful. It's everything that's wrong with American politics, in my opinion. I also want to ask one last thing about the police chief. He tends to use this, very dramatic language. For example, the night of the Atlanta protests where one of the cop cars was lit on fire, if you looked at the press releases and his video of press conference and any questions he answered, he constantly used the word explosives, knowing full well that they were just fireworks. If he wanted to be, specific about what had happened, he would have said they had thrown fireworks. Instead, he's saying they had explosives on them. And that creates a level of fear, right? Because an explosive could be something as like a pipe bomb, which is much more dangerous and serious. And I think that these are words that he's using by choice. He wants to scare people. What are your feelings on that?
No, I think that's most definitely true. I think that fits into, again, this narrative of criminalizing protesters, of using terms that do not apply, like calling things explosives when they are fireworks, like calling people domestic terrorists who are doing civil disobedience and acts of sabotage. And again, if there are laws on the books about doing certain things and they want to charge people with those things, again, we would fight them tooth and nail, but at least that would make more sense in terms of what you're charging it.
Right.
Here, this is just creating a narrative around criminalizing, and again, the theme of today is stopping dissent, and that's more what they're interested in. They don't want people protesting, they don't want people organizing, and that's what they're trying to shut down. They don't care what lies they have to use to get that done.
I agree. And in fact, this guy would charge the Boston Tea Party founding fathers with domestic terrorism for dumping tea into the Bay. This country has a very rich history of civil disobedience. It's sort of in the country's DNA, so to speak. So it's disturbing to see that. And I would like to say that anybody that is listening to this that has witnessed these events should be very angry and upset, because this is a very dangerous rhetoric that is being engaged in Atlanta, calling people that are doing nothing more than exercising their First Amendment constitutional rights domestic terrorists is an absolute bridge too far. This should concern everybody. It is truly the Orwellian world in which so many people complain about for lesser things. So I'd like to see that more people start to pay attention to this situation, because I doubt this will be the end of it. Part of one of the emails that came out from that FOIA dump with the police chief and the police foundation and some others was that they were looking at, on one of the bank loans, they were saying that 45% of the folks that would be training at Cop City would be coming from other jurisdictions. So we're talking out of state. It could well be that the LAPD, the New York Police Department, end up having contracts with Atlanta to send, their police there to train in these military procedures. So it does affect.
That's exactly what we expect. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we expect that exactly. Yeah. We obviously think that this training center and others like it is the beginning of a nationalized police tactics and strategy around stopping movements in the future, particularly movements against police violence, as well as the continuation of the over-policing, in particular of the Black community. So we very well, as you were laying out, we think that's what it is. Yeah, I
agree. It's the next wave of militarizing our police force. The people that are supposed to protect and serve are now treating people, and have been for a long time, as enemy combatants. And, if anything, we should be teaching de-escalation, not doing this. I agree with you. So any parting words for us?
Only that, across the country, we want folks to continue to get involved, be involved. There's levels of activities that people can be involved in. If they go to communitymovementbuilders.org, we have a Stop Cop City page. People can do some simple things like calling elected officials, the mayor, the city council, signing petitions, calling corporations to get them to divest, telling developers that they should not be trying to build this. From that to doing actions wherever you are, banner drops, direct action, civil disobedience, marches, demonstrations. There's a whole world of activity. We want people to get back out in the streets around this issue of police violence, because we know that that's the only way we'll be able to attack this issue and solve it.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us today, Kamau. I appreciate it. And if people want to follow you on Twitter, I know it's your name, is Kamau Franklin. Is there any other locations they should follow you at?
Well, they should follow the organization, Community Movement Builders, which is also on Twitter, Defend the Forest ATL, to find out more information about the work of Stop Cop City also.
Okay, great. Thanks.